me ask you first, as an investor, before we talk hoops, what are you telling as a venture capitalist your portfolio companies, and how are you as a tech investor thinking about all of this? Mark Cuban was on a little while ago, said he was actually buying some stocks. I'm curious as to what you're doing and what you're telling people.
Well, I think that there's two reactions that I have. I think when I look at what's going on in the world, what I would tell you is that the markets are in complete sort of turmoil and panic, and socially, people really haven't had meaningful behavior change or reactions. And I think, unfortunately, I've been telling people that it needs to be the opposite, that, a little bit of social panic is actually a good thing right now, especially if it leads to the social distancing and the type of the things that I own have kind of hung in there. Although for how much longer, I don't know, because I suspect that we're, not anywhere near the lows. But on the private side, I've been telling all of our CEOs that this is a very, very untested moment in our history. It's not like the great financial crisis. It's not like the dot-com bubble. It's kind of like both at the same time. It's the severity and the depth of the great financial crisis and the long refractory period of the dot-com bubble. So that means that you could be years without finding a real bid for your equity. And so cash and liquidity really are the most important things right now.
Those are pretty sobering thoughts. I mean, can you sort of put us on the ground in the valley? Santa Clara has been hit from this. Just sort of what are they talking about there?
Well, here's the thing. Look, I think that there are, periods of time where there are errors of omission, and then there are periods of time where there are errors of commission. And I think as of yesterday, we are firmly in a moment where every day that we don't decisively act is an error of commission. And at the federal level, I think the president was actually right to sort of, block the borders. Unfortunately, he sort of arbitrarily picked Europe. And I think that doesn't make any sense, really, because you either block them all or you block none. And, all Europe has done is proven that, they're trying to create transparency through testing. Every other border, I think, are just, lagging behind in testing capability and an awareness of the actual virality of the disease. And so, to allow people in and out, it just doesn't do anything. So it's a symbolic gesture that I don't think stops anything in any meaningful way. So if the federal government right now is sort of in the land of commission, I think the responsibility will fall to governors, and really it'll fall to the local health departments. And this is where I see some really great things happening locally. San Mateo County, Santa Clara County, where we live, are responding decisively. They're responding quickly. They're doing the hard things. They're sacrificing their local economies in hope for this greater good to prevent the social spread of this novel coronavirus. And so schools have been dismissed. Folks are working from home as much as possible. The problem is now we need the federal government to step in and provide the social and safety infrastructure that all Americans deserve. They deserve them every day before today, but from today on out, they absolutely deserve it. The richest country in the world has no excuse for not stepping up and taking care of every single man, woman, and child in America. You
said earlier that we're nowhere near a bottom. Those were your words. When do you think we get there, and how are you going to know when we are there?
Well, bottoms are not created 18 days after something like this starts. So you can go back in time and look at every meaningful drawdown in the markets, but when you go tip to tail in a bear market in 16 or 17 days, and they are brought by things that start as an exogenous event, but then very quickly morph to a broad set of externalities to a large set of constituents. What we're dealing with now is a broad-based market decline, broad-based impacts to GDP. So, for example, if you just look at travel, the travel industry and all its related interconnected businesses, are almost $9 trillion of the world's economy. Now, if you think you see travel trade off by 50 to 60% for 2 quarters, that's 5% of the world's GDP that's going to go up in smoke. And so these knock-on effects, I think, are multi-month. They're probably multi-quarter. And again, I go back to how I started. In the absence of massive and decisive federal intervention that creates confidence in the markets, it has the potential to be multi-year. And this is where I hope, the rancor and the partisanship ends today and people really in the federal bureaucracy figure this out. But if they don't, then the drawdown, I think, tip to tail, will be as bad as the great financial crisis, except, unlike it, we're not going to see some clever, cute V-shaped recovery. We're going to see what we saw after the dot-com bubble burst, which is years of malaise.
I want to get some reaction to what you're saying here from our panel, because they're listening intently, and I can tell from their faces that they want to react to what you're saying, Ron, and you're the one I looked at here. That's a very sad and sobering view if it comes true.
Yeah, and listen, it's hard to disagree with the numbers with respect to the impact on global GDP. When you look at some of the airline traffic numbers coming out of Asia, you're seeing cancellations of up to 85% of flights. So this is profound. And when you start talking about travel restrictions in the United States, in Asia, in Europe, this really puts a freeze on the movement of people and potentially the movement of goods, because those people who are delivering goods will not be allowed off the boat, as we heard from the president last night. So the multi-year process, I think, depends on whether or not we, as was said, get a forceful response. And where Scott Gottlieb said, we shouldn't nationalize the response to this. After 9/11, we nationalized certain responses like TSA and things like that, where the government stepped in and provided both a psychological and a substantive safety net to the economy. In the absence of that, and I mean full-blown, as Chamath suggests as well, then yes.
The bazooka doesn't exist because, as was just pointed out, this extends to the entire economy. It's not just the financial industry. It's not just the oil industry. It's every single business.
The one thing I'll say, though, is if Eric Rosengren, who suggested the Fed may buy different assets or may expand its asset purchases, that means corporate bonds, that means airlines, that means energy. They may redefine that intervention process.
Ron, but there's no intervention when people aren't leaving their house to go eat dinner, to go to work.
That's exactly right. Guys, you guys have to keep something in mind. Look, we've seen 3 important examples, and I think we would be foolish to ignore them. Example number 1, China acted within weeks in a completely repressive and authoritarian way, but it worked.
Do you believe the numbers?
So hold on 1 second. It doesn't matter whether you believe the numbers or not. The point is that I think that directionally they have gotten this thing under control. Example number 2, South Korea acted in a very different way, but with broad-based testing. It seems to have worked. Number 3, Italy reacted by a broad-based, federally instituted, top-down shutdown of everything. We don't know yet whether that works. We have done none of those 3 things. We don't have the capacity for number 1, politically speaking, or culturally speaking. We haven't been able to do number 2, and we have no idea whether number 3 can even be effective at this point in the game. So when you put those 3 things together, the only thing we can now start to do, in my opinion, is really start to map out the level of stimulus that the federal government needs to inject in the system. It will be TARP level. It'll probably be more than that. For example, you have $1.6 trillion of debt that's junk or just above junk just in natural resource companies in the United States, which also happen to be the largest employer in the United States. So now you could have both an employment shock where hundreds of thousands of good American, hardworking citizens are furloughed or fired, at the same time as these companies become insolvent and somebody needs to step in to buy upwards of $1 trillion of debt. That's just in one industry.
Chamath, I did want to talk to you about the NBA, but I feel like we should do that another day. I think we've gotten our arms around what the professional sports leagues are trying to do to get their their arms around it. We're thinking of everybody in those industries and the fallout, not only from the team level, but to the vendors, the folks who work in the arenas who have already been affected. Let's do that another time. I hope that we can talk to you again. I do appreciate you coming to the phone.
Thanks, Scott.